Charles, a.k.a. Son Charlie or Chuck Willard Lang, Jr., was born on December 5, 1930, in the front room of the dwelling on the corner of 1 Lang's Lane and Route 152 in Newmarket, New Hampshire. He was the third-born child of 7 to Charles Willard Lang, Sr. of then South Newmarket, now the town we know as Newfields, New Hampshire, and Dorothy Beatrice Reynolds of Lynn, Massachusetts. He had 3 sisters, Beatrice, also known as Tiny, Lois, and Patsy Jean, and 3 brothers, Theodore, known as Ted, David, or Dave, as some called him, and Gilbert, or Sandy, as he was known way back then. He entered first grade in September of 1936, and he graduated high school in June of 1948. After graduation from NHS, he continued to work part-time for the family business Lang's Ice, which was owned by his father, and also went to work for the Macallan Company, working sometimes in maintenance as well as in their molded rings department. He did this up until October 31st of 1951, when rather than be drafted into the Army, he enlisted in his favored branch of the military, the Air Force, thinking he'd serve in the air rather than on the ground. It wasn't long until he was grounded for dental reasons and found work as a hydraulic specialist maintaining the aircraft he once thought he'd operate. In December of 1952, he received his orders to Korea. There he was to spend the next 11 months and 15 days doing the work he was accustomed to in hydraulics, but never quite knowing what to expect during this time of conflict with North Korea. He spoke of surviving several or more of what he and his division called Bedcheck Charlie raids. These were when the North Koreans found it their responsibility to fly air raids over the enemy, peppering them with gunfire and bombs late at night. The closest he ever got to the line of fire was one night when they hit a nearby latrine, he said. I asked him if he'd been scared at all, and he looked at me and grinned, saying, "Everybody gets scared sometimes." A bright spot in his stay while in Korea was when a letter arrived from his brother Ted, who was serving in the Army, stating that he would be in the same location at the same time, and perhaps they could arrange to see one another while they were there. The area they were stationed in and around was called the Punch Bowl. One was at the bottom of the hill and the other at the top. Now, when I say hill, I mean nearly a mountain, and not one that had actual roads that you could just take a leisurely ride on to get to the top or the bottom. These areas could only be traversed at night and without headlights illuminating the space in front of you in case you might alert the enemy to your comings and goings. Charlie and Ted found the availability to travel to each other not once, but twice, each making the dangerous trip to see the other by dark of night. Who'd have thought that 2 brothers serving during the same conflict in different military branches would meet up in the same location in another country far across the world, rather than in the United States where they'd grown up together? Contributing much to his family's happiness, Charlie was able to return stateside in October of 1953. While serving his country in the United States Air Force, Charles Willard Lang, Jr., according to his DD 214, attended Air Force Service School at Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois, where he studied hydraulic mechanics, and again in Amarillo, Texas, where he studied administrative supervising. During his career in the United States Air Force, he received the United Nations Service Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, and the Korean Service Medal with 3 battle stars. While stationed in Dover, Delaware in 1955, while home on leave in February, he married Ruth Audrey Hawkins of Lee, New Hampshire. They then set about the task of retaining his hydraulic specialist position in the private sector in what they called a civil service position, commencing with his separation from the military in October of 1955. During this period, he would relocate several and more times to and from Delaware and New Hampshire. In May of '56, while in New Hampshire, his firstborn son, Charles Willard Lang III, was born, and then while back in Dover, Delaware, a second child arrived, another son named Alaric Curtis. In April of 1963, his father was to pass away from complications related to heart disease, forcing a move back to New Hampshire to be close to his family and friends once again. After some time passes, Charlie finds himself a job with Public Service Company of New Hampshire, and in 1964 relocates to Concord to be closer to his job, which is in Bow, New Hampshire. While living there, he and his wife Ruth Audrey find a great deal on an estate sale loaded with antiques in Kentucky, New Hampshire. They purchased the 2-bedroom living room, dining room, den, kitchen with spacious pantry and bathroom with full basement for the bargain price of $5,000. They will stay there with their boys until the spring of 1967, at which time they agree to purchase Charlie's mother's home at number 1 Langs Lane and move her into a smaller living space that would be more manageable. During the years between 1968 and 1970, Charlie would try once more working in military service for Strategic Air Command at Pease Air Force Base in Newington. Attaining his highest military rank, that of Staff Sergeant, in 1970, however, he would take a job at the Navy Yard in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and retire from there in 1983. It was also during this time when Charlie learned he had Meniere syndrome, which is an occurrence that takes place in the inner ear, affecting your equilibrium, caused by extended nearness to loud and high-pitched sound. This had to have occurred after many years working in his chosen field of endeavor, hydraulics. Never one to rest on his laurels, he would return to work in 1986, this time for the University of New Hampshire, in their facilities department, and retire a second time, after suffering the first of 3 debilitating cerebral strokes 10 years later in 1996. Charles Willard Lang Jr. and his wife Ruth Audrey would stay at number 1 Langs Lane until 1983, when the Lang family would then agree to play musical houses. Charlie and Ruth Audrey would move to number 7 Langs Lane into a newer and smaller prefabricated home. Alaric and his wife Tammy would move from number 3 Langs Lane to number 5. And Charles and his first wife and children would move from number 5 to number 1 Langs Lane, and all in the name of less and more space availability. Suffice it to say that somewhere down the road and in the distant future, that would all change again with the rise and fall of the economy. Today, Charles Willard Lang Jr. still resides at number 7 Langs Lane with his wife, Ruth Audrey. They have enjoyed 53 years of wedded bliss. They told me to say that. And even after 2 more strokes, a small one suffered in 1997, nearly 1 year to the day of the first, and a more severe one suffered in 1998 that finally took the whole of his left side's movement. He is surprisingly lucid and of good humor, glad to be a survivor and happy to have been able to live a full life and see his firstborn great-granddaughter, Trinity Faith, born in July of 2008. Thanks.
Good job.
Sorry, that's a